Hey guys, you ready to start? Yeah? All right, so before we start, let me tell you a little bit about Ubiminds first. Ubiminds started in 2018 in Florianopolis, Santa Catarina. We know that this is a big tech hub. Our purpose is to connect people with opportunities. We have a team is specialized in recruiting for US, Canadian companies for technology. So all the professionals that are within the development life cycle. So developers, engineers, leaders, architects, product designers, owners, everything within that development life cycle. Ubiminds is not just doing outsourcing. We are really working with hiring, but also what comes after. So we want to make sure that whoever we are connecting with the opportunities, they're happy, they're growing, they're really, enjoying those opportunities to the most. So to help and facilitate that path for all the Brazilians that want to start working for international companies, we created the Ubiverse. So this is our first edition. It's so special that you're participating on the very first edition with us to really help connect networks and to also give you tips on how to find out more about the US market, the Canadian market, to really prepare for those interview processes. So in that sense, we're going to get things started. So our first talk, we're going to begin towards learning more about international career. The first thing to understand is more about the market that we want to embark on. So what's going on? So we're going to open our talk with some leaders from US companies. I would invite to the stage Joel Hames. He's a product leader and education vet. Also Kaitlyn Clark, she's a senior product manager at NerdWallet. Also Randy Shepard, who's a CTO at Giphy. And to moderate our conversation, our head of business generation at Ubiminds, Scheila. All right, take it away, Scheila.
Hello, classic, is this on? I am so proud right now of what we're doing, and I'm very big stage here. I have really big names here with me. So you're also very privileged to be in front of these folks. So today, if you guys are following on the news of what's going on in the US tech market, you may have heard of layoffs or hiring freezes and these things. If we're engineers, we might be a little bit apprehensive because we want to join a market that's not, might not seem that welcoming. But the thing is, if you're good and you're in it and you're going to put in the work and you're going to be a team player, there is a space for absolutely everyone, right? I know that if you guys are here, that already shows that you're already willing to do it. So, kudos to everyone that's in here or watching online. So that's something for us to know. The second thing is, you also have to be able to show what you came for and the skill sets and the experiences that you have had so far. So that's what we want. That's what we want to help you all do tonight. You all have the X factor that make you unique and make you a valuable team member, and that's what we want to do. So the three folks that we have here with us, they're going to share a little bit about what the market is looking like right now from their experience. So we know what is myth and what is reality. So that's the first thing, reality check. And the second thing is, what they look for talent. Do they expect from you? And that's really better than anything that we can do at Ubiminds. Instead of us saying something, you get to hear from them. So, again, thank you guys for being here with us. So the first thing, I have cheat sheets, right? Very professional. That's what we're doing, just like TV. So let me start with Randy. So, Randy, of course, you're CTO at Giphy, but you're also part of a bunch of CTO pods, right? You talk to other groups and so on. So can you talk a little bit in the name of these other companies, how did the pandemic help folks become distributed and kind of what the mood is in these markets?
Is this close enough? Okay, you can hear me, right? Firstly, I'd just like to say what a privilege it is to be here with all of you and to visit your beautiful country and get to know some of you. I speak for all of us, I'm sure. It's really exciting. So thank you to the event planners for doing all the work to make this happen and to invite us. So I think they deserve a round of applause.
I should say these companies have really awesome people, so that's also like a big perk.
So it's an interesting question. I think, the pandemic is a complex topic, of course. I think there's one insight that I've sort of drawn with respect to the sort of recruiting market that I'd like to speak to. If you kind of cast your mind back to 2020 in the first few months, a lot was going on. It was a scary time, but there were two particular effects in the tech industry that I think were quite notable. The first being that, as people moved their sort of play and their work online by necessity, you just saw like a really increased demand for online services, tech products, so on and so forth. I think if you worked in the industry at that time, you saw that in your metrics. It was just a big spike. It was kind of wild, which is great. The other, most people know that. I think the other thing that's interesting that maybe people aren't as generally aware of is that there was a huge spike in entrepreneurship. Something like in the States or something like 25% more companies founded in that year than sort of the year prior. So you've got all of this consumer demand and all of these companies sort of trying to meet that demand, but they're doing it in this new way that they hadn't done before, which is with a distributed team. And so a lot of companies had distributed teams and it wasn't new to them, but for many, it was brand new. For us, it was brand new. We had some remote folks, but being distributed is different. So this is a super, super interesting development. Like one of the biggest changes to our industry that I can recall in my time in it, of course I'm only 24, but nevertheless. So I think, you look at how things are today and how things have sort of shaken out, like, we've learned a few things. Like that first is that like the digitization of our lives, like the continued development of like technology in different ways that we use it and so on, that just continues to evolve. And then also the other thing, is that remote has become normalized, right? So it's like absolutely typical for a company to be remote. So let's say you're a company that's small to mid-size and you need to compete in recruiting, with some of the big tech companies. Like being able to have the world as your recruiting pool is a huge, huge advantage. And I don't see people giving up that advantage anytime soon. So I guess my point is that there's still plenty of demand for folks living all over the world to do knowledge work. And I just don't see that changing regardless of big tech reporting poor numbers in the latest quarter or whatever.
And we actually have an added advantage here that I can tell you, which is time zone. So when we're talking about US and so on, we automatically have some advantage in comparison to someone from India or Ukraine or something like that. So, we can use all the cards in our favor. So that's a big thing. And kind of leaning into, Randy is very much in front of engineering. Maybe Joel, you can tell a little bit about how it's been on product teams of the companies and within your network too.
Absolutely. So, but first, I want to echo what Randy said, especially with respect to the beautiful area that we're in, and this is my first time to Brazil, and I love it. Of course, selfishly, I'm here. I think there's a soccer match tomorrow that people might care about. Is that right? So, a lot of Croatia fans in here, I think. No? Okay. All right. Fair enough. So, I don't want to belabor this point too much, but clearly the pandemic created a completely different environment for companies. And we've talked a lot about that, and Randy referenced some of the ways in which it impacted how teams are distributed and the acceptance of the remote culture, which I think has been overdue. The other thing I wanted to circle back on a little bit is just maybe a little perspective on the fact that what the pandemic did, other than its obvious terrible effects on human beings, was it put our financial systems into this kind of turmoil. And that turmoil persists today. When we hear about the layoffs from at Twitter and many of the other companies, my LinkedIn feed is just full of layoff news. We have to remember that most of that is not generated by demand. In other words, the demand for services hasn't gone down. In fact, it continues to increase. It's one of the problems we face, inflation, and yet even with inflation, consumer demand is going up, especially in North America. It was generated because our financial systems kind of got into some turmoil, and as a result, interest rates are rising around the world, especially in the US, and money is just harder to get. And a lot of venture capital and private equity-backed companies are experiencing the impact of these incredibly high valuations and the changing economic landscape. So they're laying off a ton of people. But the other part of that is that overall, there's more people employed this month than last month. So the job market remains strong. It's just these companies that are particularly in the spotlight right now, and it's a little bit of a pullback from some of the major investments done over the last year or two. But what do we know about the economy? It's cyclical. And that's why this is a particularly brilliant and beautiful time to be getting trained and to be coming into the industry or looking for a job, working with Ubiminds and others, because you have the confluence, the connection now in the coming 3, 6, and 9 months of a job market's going to have to rebound a little bit. These companies are going to go back out and find talent that they let go. In fact, there are already stories about some of them having to recall some of the folks back in. And you combine that with this incredibly different landscape for remote work, and you have the perfect recipe for finding the right talent in the right place wherever it is in the world. So I think that that's really one of the big takeaways here is the pandemic did change a lot of things, remote work. We're seeing the financial system turmoil as well. But over the next 3, 6, and 9 months, I feel very positive about what that means for the talent we're going to be able to bring into the companies we're in.
Okay, just getting back a little bit, Randy. So you gave us this view of the pods, but specifically, I know that Giphy had teams in Ukraine before, then you expanded to LATAM. What do you think will drive you to continue to hire distributed? I mean, obviously you have awesome folks in the US, but when you hire folks from other countries, what kind of things are you gaining? What kind of team do you get out of it, basically?
I think there's a few ways to answer that question. I think it may be easiest to first say a little bit about what we look for generally, because ultimately, if the team is distributed anyway, it frees us from that constraint in hiring, and therefore we can kind of just look for the characteristics that we really like to see in team members. Giphy, I'm assuming some folks have used it. It's a fun thing. It's a way that people express themselves. And in order to make a fun thing, you kind of need to have fun doing it. If we were all really boring and bored, it probably wouldn't be a very fun product. So anyway, of course we want skills and technical capability, but just as much we're looking for folks who have empathy and are looking to collaborate with other smart folks and can take feedback and give it professionally, communication skills, generally speaking, all of that stuff is just as important, and there's absolutely no sort of geo-specific ownership of that in the US. That can be found in people all over the world, of course. The other things that we kind of look at, and a big one for us is sort of product-minded focus, somebody who kind of works backwards from what product outcomes we're looking for our product, as opposed to sort of working up from, say, a certain interest of theirs. I really want to use this piece of technology, so I'm going to find a way to kind of shimmy it into position. And then I think, one other thing that's really, the reason that we went to Ukraine, feel free to tell me to stop rambling at any point. It's no problem.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I think, I don't see any complaints, so
Okay,
we're
all
good.
right. Yeah. The reason that we went to sort of started hiring folks in Ukraine initially was for the reason I mentioned earlier, which was in New York City, we're trying to compete with Google down the street, who can offer just way more money than we could. That's just the simple fact of the matter. So we had to, make up for it in other ways. And so by necessity, we were going outside of New York, and that's sort of where we ended up first. And I'm really glad they did, because we met some really wonderful people there who are now currently under some pretty difficult circumstances. I'm sure everyone is aware. I think what I would say then is that the Ubiminders that we have at Giphy are very much all of the things we just mentioned. Big shout out to them. I have yet to meet them in person. I'm pretty excited to do that. We're working together for some time now, but haven't had the chance. So it's another, reason I'm happy to be here. And then, I think lastly, not to pander to y'all too much, but what I would say is that it's probably bears saying that very rapidly in just the past few years, Brazil has gained this very strong reputation as a place where highly skilled technical knowledge workers live, right? For many years it was India and then Eastern Europe, and then somewhere in the past few years, sort of out of nowhere, Brazil just showed up and said, "Everyone hold my beer, because here I am." And it's been pretty cool. We've got to work with some great folks, and so yeah, like I said, not to overdo it, but I do think it's worth telling you that the reputation is very much that.
Yeah. I'm so glad to hear that, because our talent acquisition team, they know that, and that's why they advocate for the engineers and so on. But I can also say that I've been doing this for 3 years. I don't have to convince anyone that we have good talent here. So that's something that's right off the bat, they believe in you. So that's something if you're a little bit weary of, I don't know, it's not my first language, or I don't have a network there, you can be proud of what we have here. And kind of going into that, Kaitlyn, I'm sorry I had not addressed you yet, but I see, and we've had this conversation this morning, that this can work also for very heavy regulated companies too. NerdWallet, you're working with a fintech space, and it's still not boring as a team, and you're still valuing to have diversity and having people that come from other school systems. So you can put a little bit about that, how that works for you guys.
Yeah, is this on? Just want to echo the thanks for spending your evening with us. Is it on?
Yeah.
I don't sound that loud to myself. Okay. And I think I'm the only one on stage who saw a capybara today, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but definitely a highlight of the trip so far. And yeah, to answer the question, so NerdWallet is a personal finance company, and so while we have long had distributed teams though, and have a lot of talent in Latin America, and so while it might be sort of the business leaders and product and technical leads who are in the room when we're setting the annual strategy and committing to outcomes, we really pass the responsibility down for the tactics, and that comes bottoms up. And so that relies on a lot of trust in the teams. And I think NerdWallet is a place that understands that the company grows when our people are growing. And I think as we change things and try to reorganize the company to work more productively, we don't lose sight of those growth opportunities for people. And the most recent one that comes to mind is that we reorganized our tech team in the area that I work in to have these trios where a designer, a product manager, and an engineer share accountability for not only the ideas they come up with, but also the outcomes. And so they're doing that with a lot of A/B testing and experimentation. And I'm going to embarrass our Ubiminds engineer because he was chosen to be one of those leaders and have that shared accountability. So we make those decisions sort of agnostically to where you come from. It's really what your drive is and what we know you can contribute. And so I don't think there's any lack of opportunity there.
Actually, just to build on that, what are the traits and the characteristics you're looking both when you're hiring, but when you're promoting folks too? What makes people stand out?
Yeah, I think like Randy said, the product mindset and the business interest is huge. I know I'm a better product person for being challenged by engineers, not being afraid to poke holes in my ideas and really ask questions about what we're trying to achieve. And I think another thing that comes to mind is I have so much respect for people who are working every day in their non-native language, and I think that really demonstrates this desire to grow and learn, and when that shows up in the workplace, I think we're all better for it, and I think it extends to engineering skills as well as language skills. And I think one area where I, as a US-based employee working with a distributed team, have really grown is that I think there's a responsibility to be more clear about the expectations and the processes of the team and make sure it's documented in a way where people with different communication styles and preferences can reference it later. And that doesn't mean you have to stay with the same process forever, but just I think it's so important for people to know where to go and where to look when things do change, so they're not feeling anxious about that change or unsettled just because they might be in a different place. And I think right now the team I work with, we're in 3 countries and technically 3 different organizations, and it's certainly the fastest team I've ever worked with, and I think that's credit obviously to the amazing talent, but also just the clear expectations and the fact that every day I think the team knows what we want to see and what we want to do.
Perfect, thank you. Just to be mindful of our time, I have one final question for all of you, which is basically, if you could give one advice, like what could the folks here bring as value to the table and, you know, really make them stand out? Like, why are you happy to work with these brilliant engineers and so on? Maybe start with Joel, you've been quiet for a while.
Well, I would love, as a product guy, I'd love it to be the product focus, but I think that's been mentioned. I'm bring a slightly different part into this, which is, I think we, hopefully, all of us in this room, we work with our teams. We care about how our teams work, the individuals, the human beings that we are partner with on a day-to-day basis. Part of being involved in a team is caring about how that team functions and then how that team fits into the bigger picture. And some of the most amazing people that I've worked with in my career are clearly also the ones that kind of looked up a little bit, took a few minutes a day or a few minutes in a meeting or sent that extra note, or frankly, even as chief product officer, a junior engineer that reaches out to me that says, hey, I see something that I think can be better about the way we work, the way we treat each other, the way this situation is unfolding, and they want to be part of helping to shine a light on that and part of resolving it. I think sometimes that gets forgotten in our day-to-day work because we go heads down, we're in front of our computer, we're just plowing ahead. But those relationships that we have and how your contribution to the improvement of your team, the processes that you work in, the culture within your team and thus the company, being mindful of that and caring enough to send that note, to think about that, I think that goes a huge way. And even being able to represent that when you're interviewing, that these are some of the things you care about. It's not just the one thing I do, it's what we do together. That really stands out.
Randy, Kaitlyn, anything to add there?
I think my advice would be similar and sort of echoes what I said before. Be confident in your perspective, even if and though it's different. I think bringing that into an environment is tough sometimes. It's hard to be confident, especially if you feel like an outsider at first. But I think the power of distributed work is getting more of those different ideas.
It's funny, I'm going to sort of build on that a little bit. I sort of had this in my head to mention, so I'm glad I got the opportunity. So, one of the things that I've learned at Giphy over the past 8 years that I will take with me forward, which I think I'm really proud of about our team, is that we have a bunch of people who work together very well, who are all very different. And when you have people who are very different collaborating on the same problem, you get way better outcomes than if you have a bunch of people who all think the same way. This diversity of thought is actually a key, thing that I will always look for in building teams in the future. I've worked in shops where it's like, 20 white American dudes, and versus where I'm at now, and it's just night and day, like how much better, the sort of outcomes are, as I mentioned. So I think to jump on what they're saying, which is, once you get settled and assuming that the company is doing a good job of making you feel included, which they should, right? Like we want, from speaking personally, we want you to be, Ubiminders, to be like a first-class citizen, someone that is part of the team. There should be, on most cases, like really no difference between any full-time employee engineer and an Ubimind engineer, for example. But once you're sort of there and you have your feet under you, it's like your point of view, your perspective, your background, what makes you you is actually contributing meaningfully to better outcomes and solutions. So just don't be afraid to share that.
Okay, then to close off, just summarize it. Again, regardless of what's going on out there, there's always going to be opportunities for folks that are willing to collaborate, right? Communicate. We should not be shy about our ideas. I guess you can always agree on that, right? Like, If you have an idea, bring it forward. Because I think you kind of stress test something, right? If it's not good, you find out that it's not good and you come up with something better. And if you came up with something that nobody had thought before, kudos to you and the whole team that's going to make the best use of that. So again, make yourselves available, make yourselves open. And I think kudos to you guys as well, because you have to have safe spaces, right, for people to be able to put themselves forward and not be embarrassed. Doesn't matter how introvert you are, there's no bad ideas. I think that's the main lesson that I have here today. Okay, so in that sense, Danny.
Awesome. We're going to be happy to take some questions, because this is a great chance for you also to ask and, find out more that you want to know. Anybody that wants to ask a question, raise your hand. We're going to take a mic to you. If you're not comfortable speaking English, that's okay. You can speak in Portuguese, and we can translate and have these amazing people answer your questions. I think there's already a couple from our online audience. I heard Joel, I heard Kaitlyn, I heard Randy talking about how they bring people to collaborate. They are looking for people such and such. And we're going to talk about hiring process in a little bit, but it's great to hear from you. How do you evaluate that, or how do you look for that during a recruiting process before they join the company?
All right, I'll take a stab.
Yeah.
This is both a tough question and an easy one. An easy one because when you've interviewed 50 or 100 or 500 or 1,000 people in your life, you start to develop at least some degree of an intuitive sense of what a collaborative, productive kind of growth mindset looks like in someone being interviewed. What makes it tough is that I could try to synthesize it into the 3 magic things to say, but I don't think that's it. I think what matters most in the recruiting process is being genuine. If you might be nervous, certainly I've interviewed, and I myself have been nervous in situations like this, but bringing your genuine self into that conversation, reflecting a bit about what makes you unique, and then sharing a bit, having a story or two that really demonstrates the way you work with others, that kind of collaborative mindset. Specifics always helps. So if you don't have it right now, think about that one time when you worked with a group, with a team, with one other person, and produced something really cool, and have that story ready. But don't necessarily rehearse it, right? Just bring yourself, just like you're talking to someone at a restaurant or something like that. So I think that genuineness, some specific examples of how you collaborate and build each other up, I think those are some of the starting points I would give.
The only thing I would add to that is don't be afraid to talk about when things went wrong, because that can be so illuminating of how you respond to challenges and work with other people to overcome the obstacles. And I think when I ask in interviews about challenges, that's really when I see the most of the person's character come through.
There's loads of advice I think that one could give here. The 2 things that come to mind, I think this is particularly true with engineers, since I was a IC for 17 years before I managed a person. So I was a software engineer for a long time, so that's very fresh in my mind still to this day. I think we can be confronted with a scenario or a problem in an interview context, and we can approach it from this sort of analytical standpoint where it's this is what should be done, or this is what we should do. And I think, what I'm hoping to see is a sort of a circumspect approach to any particular scenario or problem. Can I kind of stand back and look at the big picture? And can I relate to other team members who have different incentives and different things that they want? This is not, I tell people, and it's not a trick, and we also make sure usually to have people meet people in other departments to kind of test this a little bit. Hey, can you talk to a designer or a product person about a thing that they do and have a meaningful, collaborative, good conversation? I think that's, so just be on the lookout for that. I think that's, think broadly about what's being asked and other people's perspectives. And the one sort of thing I'll throw in as a bonus is never, ever never, 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 ever say anything bad about anybody at your old job. Like, never do it. Like, just don't. Even if that person was terrible, awful, like, and you genuinely they ran over your cat, they tried to get you fired, like, just don't do it. It's never a good look.
Yeah, not the challenges to talk about.
All right. There's another couple of questions here online, both in terms of more specific knowledge. So they want to know about international teams, opportunities for people that have intermediate English, or what kind of skill level and profiles for software engineer, tech people that your companies hire.
I think it varies from company to company. I think Ubiminds, for example, seems to have really high expectations in a positive way. I think that they really support their people and make sure they're ready to interview at the level that their partner companies are requesting. So I think the sentiment I have here is, again, like, don't have confidence in what you're bringing to the table, and intermediate English is not going to hold you back. I think, the skills are what's most important, both hard skills and some soft skills, but you deserve a team that supports you through the language barrier. So of course, it's great to be improving, but again, I said earlier, I think it's such a testament to your grit that you're going in that direction in the first place. So I think if you don't feel as confident with your English, I think it's fine to acknowledge that, and it's definitely fine to seek out a team that's going to support you through that and over communicate. Yeah.
I'll add one thing about that. In the last 24, no, I haven't been here 24 hours, maybe 24 hours, that I've been here, I've had at least a half a dozen folks come up to me, people come up to me and start talking and apologize for their English. And in every single case, it was totally fine. And it wasn't a problem. I think we assess ourselves differently than the rest of the world. I don't think that's a think statement. I know we do. We have a self-perspective. We look in the mirror and we see certain characteristics that are amplified for us, but others see us differently. So I do think having that confidence when you come into the conversation, I think that confidence and the genuineness that I spoke about earlier really, really matters. Because if you get a few words wrong, if you stumble and try to find it, if you have to pull out Google Translate to find out what the English word is, I don't care about that. Like, I'm not worried about that part of it. What I care about is that you're out there, you're trying, and you know way more English than I know Portuguese. So kudos to all of you. So that's
I ordered lunch in Portuguese with Google Translate today. That was my accomplishment.
There you go.
And that's about the best I can do. I think, the only thing I'd add, which is just really quick, is that that's kind of, I think, probably one of the benefits of working for or with a company like Ubiminds, I would imagine, is that they're going to sort of like they're going to match you with an appropriate opportunity. They're probably going to have a pretty good idea of what's required by the client in terms of language skills, and therefore, you're probably not going to be put into a position where you're going to be vastly out of bound from what is necessary or expected. And listen, like, if an entire company, imagine a hypothetical company in which the entire team could totally not tolerate someone English not being their first language. That is not a place you would want to work for. So, I would echo again and say, it's all extremely impressive that you're capable to communicate in a language that's not your first, and so. Sure.
And just to add to that, yes, you do need to have a certain level of English, but we also, like anyone that joins our team, they have free English classes throughout their work. So you have your general English that you've learned watching series and all this stuff, but we have native teachers that support you with like very context-specific languages, like how do I pitch something in a stand-up meeting, or these kind of things. So just kind of like, guys, I'm from marketing, so I'm going to throw in these little fun facts there. I'm biased.
Awesome. I think we have a question.
Can I? Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to ask you guys, like, if you have any tips, if someone's like changing career into tech or into development. Like, I know guys here coming from law, coming from marketing, and I want to know if you guys have any special tips for those. That's it.
Tips going into technology from other industries. You know what? Actually, I'll start. We could probably crowdsource 100 of these, but I'll start with. It's probably not as different as you think it's going to be. All of these industries have characteristics in common that matter about how we work. So how we communicate, how we apply ourselves on an everyday basis, the creativity we use. There's so much of that gets applied within the context of this kind of technology work. I came from education. I was an educator and I worked on education technology teams before I ever went into any kind of software development, before I started working in education technology as a field. And while, yes, there were definitely things I had to learn, the reality was the way our teams operated, the way we talked to each other, the way we thought about our outcomes had a lot in common with what we did in the schools that I worked in. So I think maybe the first piece of advice is whatever the perceived difference is, it's probably not that different in terms of an everyday experience. It's just now exercising a different skill set in support of that.
Yeah, and I'm on the product side, and I like to joke that I don't have any skills. I just communicate between groups of people who have the skills. And of course, that is a skill, but I do hope that it sort of like demystifies what it is to be a product manager. It really is problem solving and communicating and being willing to be the person to ask questions multiple times to multiple people and be the one to make a decision even when it's hard. And like Joel said, those aren't skills that are specific to technology. Those are skills that you can build anywhere. And so it's really about learning the language of technology so that you can frame your experiences in a way that matches those needs to communicate and problem solve.
I'm gonna jump in, Randy, because I actually realized there's something I didn't say that I think is really important, because it applies whether you're going into a product job or engineering or anything like that. And I'll make it quick, I promise. There's a perception in technology when we see people like previously Steve Jobs, we see Elon Musk, we see others of the kind of if you know the term, the Herculean leader, the person who themselves, like, they lift everyone up because they're geniuses. You know, there are a few people out there like that, but for the
Right here.
yeah, right there. I get the privilege of sitting next to a couple of them, but the reality is that the success we experience is because we care about the people we're making our thing for. So if we think about in education, or you think about if you're a doctor or a lawyer, you work for others, you listen to them, you're paying attention to what's happening in their lives and responding to them with the skill set you have. The same thing in the work we do, whether it's a technical engineering, cloud ops, software development job, it's product management, product design. Everything we do has to be about listening to those that need whatever it is we're providing and making it better for them. It's not about individually coming up with the most brilliant idea ever. It's not that one line of code that's going to transform the world. It's about relentless pursuit of what your users need and listening to people and listening to them every day.
So, little info about me. I actually was self-taught. I was an anthropology undergraduate. Turns out they don't have jobs. But I really, loved computers as a kid, and got into programming, and took a couple classes here and there, and managed to convince a consulting company to give me a job, and it just kind of spiraled off from there. And then later, I went back to school and did a master's in computer science, which I really loved. So I have a certain point of view on this topic. I think the thing that you can do that will help is, if you're talking about it from like a sort of like job seeking point of view, is just to make sure that your passion and your interest is just out there for people to see. A lot of people who do the job of, fingers on keyboard programming do it because they really enjoy it. I know I did. I unfortunately don't get to do it much these days, but you enjoy it, and so you kind of do it a lot for fun, and it's your career, right? And so the product of that hopefully that yields code that you can throw up on GitHub or just things that you can talk about. And if you can telegraph that you're like really into this and that you're generally like capable and smart, then like people will absolutely 100% take a gamble on you because they can sort of estimate, yeah, this person in a few years is going to be a superstar. So that's my take.
Awesome. I'm afraid we have time just for one more question. So they're saying it's really tough to feel as part of a company in the beginning. That's the way they feel. How are you integrating the new talents and helping them deliver value as fast as possible?
I'd like to speak on this one just because I think it speaks to what I said earlier, which is that it's fair to have an expectation that the team you're going into has good documentation and processes for that onboarding, and I think it's to the benefit of the company to get you as comfortable as quickly as possible. And so I won't discount the emotional aspect. It's definitely tough to join a new team, but I think those are questions you can ask in the interview process. Like, how do you onboard a new teammate? What are the processes you use day to day? Just to make sure that the answers they have to those questions are confident and stable, because I would say those are the best indicators that you'll be successful quickly, is if they know how to make someone successful quickly.
Yeah.
I was just going to add to that. Sometimes when they're doing interviews, we're so concerned of whether the interviewer is enjoying our answers and liking that, but we have to remember that we're interviewing the companies too, right? So making these kind of questions to make sure that we're learning about the company and we're identifying if they're a good fit for us, that's equally important.
Yeah, before Randy jumps in, Scheila, that was exactly right. And I was going to encourage, as one of your questions in the interview process, by the way, this may not be able to happen exactly this way, but ask to observe a stand-up. Think of how powerful that would be if you could see how the team you're about to go into operates just in the morning when they get together and they have that conversation about what's going to happen that day. Are they just going through the motions? Are they leaning in and helping each other? Is there a genuine rapport going on? I mean, that's if you can't get into one, if you can't do that in the interview process, like actually go observe one, just ask for what are some of the characteristics that the stand-ups have. Like, how does that leader, how does that manager, how does that software lead, how do they participate and how encourage that, just in that very practical piece of a thing called a stand-up.
Mm-hmm.
Two things come to mind that are related, just to throw in. The first one I'd say is that when you are interviewing with a company, take the perspective that you are interviewing them as well. You are going to spend a lot of time with those folks, and you have every right to convince yourself that you're going to enjoy that time and that it's a right fit for you. So feel empowered and entitled to that. And then I think the other thing to think about, and this is sort of like having to do with more with just the onboarding experience, is the other thing I would say is that during that first couple of months that you're at a place, or as you're sort of learning about it, you should equally feel entitled to ask loads of questions. You can kind of put a time box in your own head, like, okay, for the first, X number of weeks, I'm gonna just, I'll batch all of my questions so that I don't make everyone crazy by asking questions every 30 seconds. But, really just make an active effort to, you're all smart folks, if you put your mind to it and you really wanna understand how a place and a thing works, like, you just can consolidate that list of things and chase that stuff down. And this has the dual benefit of helping you get more effective more quickly, but also makes your teammates love you because you're getting up and going and contributing because they brought someone in because they needed the help. And then the sooner you understand everything, the sooner you get help. So that's sort of the thoughts that I will tack on the end there.
Perfect. Well, thank you, guys. We had a couple of questions here, and they were asking a little bit about the growth prospect on the sector after COVID lessened, and also how the recruiting will be affected in the face of tech financial crisis that is going on. And I think Joel addressed that a little bit in the beginning, talking about even the layoffs and how, that's now, but in a little bit, those companies will need to hire again. And, that just means going sometimes down, but up again, and just going, after those positions. So, I think we're coming to a close to that panel. Can we give our panelists a round? right. Well, thank you so much, guys. We're going to take a quick break, just 5 minutes, go to the bathroom, grab a water, and we'll be right back. Okay?